This lady is named Jane Steele Leatham. And she's the daughter of Janet and John Steele. And she was born in Yorkshire, Scotland on September the 5th of 1830. Her father, John Steele, was a graduate from the University of Edinburgh and was said to possess the finest private library in Yorkshire. Even as a student, he loved to read and study, but he wanted to make it more attractive, so he put a conservatory in there, and he would raise beautiful flowers and shrubs, and he'd take his flowers and cut them, and he would sell them daily in the Edinburgh market. During his last illness, he was visited by so many ministers. They all wanted him to join the church and their church, and they wanted to convert him to certain things and to each church, but he wouldn't join. He didn't want to talk about it. And so they'd ask him, "Now, do you really believe in God?" And he would look at his flowers and his trees, and he would point at them, and they wouldn't say anything. Just point at the flowers and the trees. And I think that was the message he was giving them. Now, Janet, who is Jane's mother, she was very social. She loved music. She was an excellent housekeeper. She was strong in the religious, just like we all want to be, but none of us are, perfect like that. But she was, and she left the mark with her sons and daughters that loved and remembered their home as a bonny Scotland ideal. Sometime during the year of 1843 and 44, Janet Alexander Steele and several members of her family joined the church and were converted by an elder, Robert Leatham, who afterwards married their youngest daughter, Jane. Jane showed taste in literature. She loved, and of course with her dad liking it, naturally, she would stay in his library and read, and she loved his library and she loved to read. She received the education like everyone else in Scotland. The women had less than the men. And so she got this standard education, but she got to be as an assistant teacher in the elementary school for some years. Then on Christmas Day in 1847, Jane Steele married Robert Leatham. Now guys, remember that. You marry on Christmas, then you never forget your anniversary. You have your ring or your necklace you give them for Christmas, but they think it's anniversary. You got it made. This guy was smart.
Years ago.
Yeah. I just thought, this guy is really a smart guy. He knows what to do. So anyway, they got married, and they had an infant son named Robert Steele Leatham, and they said goodbye to Scotland and started for America. The voyage was long and tedious, and she got very ill, and the baby died on the route, and of course they buried him in the ocean. That's what they did with him. And after that, they came to New Orleans and lived for a few years in Pennsylvania and in St. Louis, Missouri, where her mother joined her. After the father died, then Janet came and lived with Jane too. It says she lived only a short time, the mother, and she, after coming to America, and she was buried in St. Louis, so she never got to Utah. And they had two daughters while they were there. They had a daughter while they were there, and her name was Rosalia. Soon after the death of their mother, Jane and her husband Robert and family started for Utah. Their daughter, Annabelle, was born in Hans Fork, Wyoming. They arrived in Salt Lake in autumn of 1852, and soon after, they went to southern Utah and lived for a time in Cedar City, where their daughter Janet and their son John was born. In the year 1859, they went to live at Mons Fort, which we know now as Wellsville, the oldest settlement in the beautiful valley, and where the exception of a short time in Providence, they made their home. They had two daughters there, and I counted them, and they had 10 children that lived. One that passed away in the ocean, but that they lost on the trip. For a number of years, they lived in the fort close to the communications with the neighbors and the mutual protection because of the Indians. And so most of everybody lived there because they had someone that would sit up at night and stand guard. And then if there was a problem, they would call in the militia. So these people lived kind of like a family all together in Mons Fort for a long time. And they had 2 or 3 different incidents that happened. One time, a woman was killed, and another time a little girl was taken. And the parents looked and looked, never found her, but they found out years later that she had died from exposure many years before. And I think that would be the hardest thing you could ever think of, is losing a daughter and not knowing where she was and then find out that later. For a number of years they lived, however, life in the fort had its highlights. It was a happy family when they came to live what they considered a beautiful pioneer home. Now, pioneer homes were one big room, and in the middle was the fireplace, and then there was the girls' bedrooms back here, and the boys' bedrooms were upstairs, right? And that was the whole thing of the house. But they always had fun times sitting by the fire and telling ghost stories and Indian stories. They remember doing that. And in the evening they would sing Scottish melodies. The mother would teach them that, and she would read to them. Not only did she have a beautiful voice, and she sang, the mother did, but she also was talented in writing. And she wrote the obituaries and other articles for the Women's Exponent, the paper published in Salt Lake City in the interest of the LDS Relief Society. In 1879, Janet Steele Leatham was called by Bishop William H. Mon to go to Salt Lake and study obstetrics under Dr. Ramona Pratt, and then to perform a mission among the people of Cache County. At first, her health prevented her from doing that, but she decided she better do it, and so she went and took the classes. She took the training and became the first midwife of Cache Valley. Practicing obstetrics for 19 years, she became very prolific and was loved and cherished by everyone. Now I want to tell you something about her. There's a legend about the midwives, the Scottish midwives, and their blessings. And this event in this story supposedly happened to a distant relative and was told by Jessie Bradshaw, an aunt. This woman who migrated to Wellsville, which was Jane, from the Scottish Highlands, became a midwife and was said to have a gift, a second sight. She had visions, sometimes about things which were going to happen, and more than once she saved someone's life by warning them ahead of time. One night when she had just gone to bed, she thought she heard someone weeping. Then she dreamed that Sister Leatham was calling her. She got up at once and prepared to go to the Leatham farmhouse to see if Mrs. Leatham, who was expecting a baby, was all right. Now, Mrs. Leatham was the second wife in a polygamy marriage, but the husband was with the other wife, and so she was alone there. When Janet got there, the farmhouse, she found that the town doctor was there. But he had no idea what to do. The baby seemed stuck and there was no way to get it out. The doctor was drunk. He started calling her names and pulling out a pair of forceps. The midwife knew that there were other things they could do, but the doctor wouldn't even listen to her. He got mad at her. He crushed part of the baby's skull in his clumsy attempts to remove it from the womb. The oldest daughter of the house put a candle in the window, which was something they always did. If there was a problem, that was the call from the neighbors, and the candle in the window. Because she knew that now her baby brother was not going to live very long. The doctor had passed out on the floor, cold from too much whiskey. So the midwife rode out to the sacred spring by the foot of the mountains. Now this is out in Bradshaw's ground. It's up by the Stake Farm, is where Bradshaw's land were, and there's springs up there. And she went up to this spring, and she took and got water up in a leather pouch. When she got back to the farmhouse, she went up to the little wooden cradle containing the poor little baby, sprinkled the baby with water on his head, and said some words that no one could understand because she said them in Scottish. The baby recovered, and when the doctor awoke, he was furious because only men were supposed to perform blessings. Now, nobody told that lady that blessed her oxen how, so that she could make it to here. But later, even the elders of the church said that it was in the absence of a man, it was permissible for a woman to bless. The midwife lived a long time, always going to her sacred spring for healing waters. She died of old age on the 1st day of May in her 98th year. When she died, it was said that the sacred spring she went to would dry up. And the only time that there were water that flowed in this spring was on the day that she died.